Hey everyone, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can do elevation maps in Cinema 4D. It's fairly straightforward. The only thing you really have to do is learn a little bit about Sketch and Toon, and that's about it. But here are some images of some elevation maps, and what I'm going to be doing is kind of doing a combination of both these gradient labeled elevation maps mixed with the elevation line maps or these contour maps that you sometimes see as well. So I'm going to combine both of them into one of these guys right here. So we're actually going to make our landscape object scale up and have the contour lines grow on and also have the gradient kind of wipe on as well. Alright, and we are inside the lovely Cinema 4D interface, and first things first, we actually need to create a landscape that we can actually put an elevation map on. So under the objects, we're just going to grab a landscape object. And then what we're going to do is just kind of mess around with some of these settings here. What I want to do is make the mountain a little bit higher, so I'm going to give that a value in the Y of about 200. It's got a little taller mountains here. Segments are fine. What I want to do is bring down the rough and fine furrows to kind of smooth everything out. And then I'm going to turn off multifractal, so now we got all these kind of smaller hills. And then what you can do is just kind of mess around with the seed and see what looks good. And that looks fine for me. So now we got our mountain. We're going to paint some happy trees. Now we're going to actually make a gradient to actually color and put a material on top of this. So I'm going to double click on the material manager, rename this gradient. And what I want to do is create like a little funky gradient that goes from the top or from the bottom to the top of the mountain to kind of give it a nice color shift as the elevation gets higher. So what I'm going to do is turn off everything and turn on luminance. And then what I'm going to do is go and create a gradient. And let's actually apply this to our landscape object here. And you can see that it's applied in 2D space from left to right, and we don't want that. You can see that 2D V doesn't help either because it's still 2D, it's still flat going from front to back. What we need is top or bottom to top, and to do that, to get that, we're going to go to 3D linear. And now what that's going to do is actually give us the start and end of where our gradient starts and ends in 3D space. So these values are just X, Y, and Z for both the start and the end. So right now, our 3D gradient starts at -100 in the X, so right here, and it ends in 100 centimeters in the positive X, so right here. And then you can see it just is kind of tiled. So now that you can make sense of what these values are, we can actually zero them out. And what we actually need to do is have the start of the gradient kind of be in the negative 100 here, because our landscape is 200 centimeters high, and then our end gradient, so you can see our end is right about there, and that's 0 in the Y. And what we're going to do is just bring this value up, and you can see that's pushing our the end of our gradient up. So then we can just keep pushing this until about 75, and that's looking good. So now we see we have this gradient as the elevation of our mountain gets taller and taller. Now what I want to do is change the gradient to some funkier colors. I'm just going to go with some like crazy 80s colors here. We're going retro. This is a retro mountain. And then you can kind of mess around with this as you like. And that's looking good to me. So now what we can do is go ahead and create our contours. And the way that I'm going to do this is by going to Effect and Sketch and Toon. And what that's going to do is create a Sketch and Toon material. And what I'm going to do is go to Interactive Render Region here. I think it's taking up the whole entire screen here. Yep. And what I want to do is you can see that it's already applied to our entire scene. And we have all of these options here on by default. Now let's actually just turn all this off for now. I'm going to go to Render, and I'm going to turn on Resolution Independent. And what this is going to do is when we actually draw our contours, depending on how zoomed in you are, could change the thickness of the line. But with this, it'll actually stay the same size or same thickness of line as we're zooming in and out. So that's good. For shading, I want to change the background color from color to just off. Actually, no. Let's make that color match the purple color there, and that's good. And then let's see, for shading, we can just turn off. We don't want any quantizing or anything like that. And I think everything else is good here. So now what we want to do is actually turn on our contour lines. And then in Sketch and Toon options here, we actually have this contour checkbox. So if I turn that on, you can see that we're getting lines, but they're kind of not in the correct position here. And that's because our position is object X. And what we want to do is, we don't want it from left to right on the X-axis. We actually want it on the object Y. So now you can see that now we have this awesome contour action going on and applied via the Sketch and Toon. So what I actually want to do is, since I'm going to be actually animating the contours coming on and actually scaling down the landscape object and stuff, what I want to do is, I don't want this to be based on where the object position is. I kind of want this to be a stationary position based on the world axis. So what we can do is change that to world Y, and you can see nothing changes, but if I start moving this, you can see that everything kind of stays the same. But if I had this on object Y, and I move, or if I move the scale down, you can see we're kind of getting something different. But all preference, I just want to change to world Y here. And then what you can do is start playing around with all these settings. So if you want some variation in the contour lines, you can change that. So I give it, I like to give it just a little bit of variation here, just a little bit, and then you can actually change how many lines you want by changing the steps. So if I change it to 8 steps, we have 8 lines. And if I have 5, even less. And you can bring it all the way up to have a whole crap ton of lines and get some really cool looking effects here. But for now, I think I just want to stick around the 15 steps. That looks pretty good. Or 18, that looks better. So that is actually how you create the contour lines with the world position here, and and you can change the variation, all that good stuff, and then you actually can have this kind of animate on as well. So if you change the min and max, it's kind of the max value that the contours go to. So the percent value here. So you can keyframe this max value and have it kind of animate on like that. So we can actually do that if we want, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually animate all this stuff on in another way, and that can be found in our actual sketch material here. So we got our contour all set up the way that we like. So we're going to close out of that. Going to close out of the Sketch and Toon menu, and we're going to the actual sketch material here. And here you can go to thickness and kind of change the thickness of the line if you want to. I think 1.5 might be good, nice little balance. And then we have opacity, all this other stuff you can change. But I want to go to animate. And now what you can do is actually have built in Sketch and Toon is you can actually have the lines, the Sketch and Toon lines, draw on and off. So what I'm going to do is turn on draw, and you'll see that by default we're set from our mode is draw, so that's good, that's what we want. And we have stroke order, and the stroke order is from long segments to short segments, and that's fine. Single strokes is good, and then we have this draw speed, which you have all these options here. By default, it's set to animation end, so basically at the end of our animation at frame 150, all of our lines will be drawn on. And then you can also set the start frame on this as well. But if we actually want to animate this and have a lot more control, what we're going to do is change this to completion. And then we have this completion percentage that if I kind of drag the value here, you can see that that is drawing on and controlling the drawing on of all of our lines here. So that's what we're going to use to keyframe all these contour lines or our elevation lines to turn on. So let's go frame about 60 and turn this set a keyframe here. Then we're going to go to, let's go to say frame 25, and this is where our lines will start to come on. Now also what I want to do is animate this landscape scaling up basically. So what I'm going to do is put a keyframe on the size in the Y position. So I'll set a keyframe for both of those. And let's bring up our timeline here. And let's go and let's see our landscapes here. And let's make these, so this will be our like final scale here, and we'll go to frame 0 and bring down the landscape in the Y to about 0, and then our scale to 0 as well. So as I hit these keyframes, you can see they're in my timeline right here, and I actually don't need Z or X, just Y. And since they have the same kind of animation curve, I'm going to hit play, and you'll see that our mountain is kind of scaling up. You can see that our lines are also being scaled up with it. Cool, but what you're seeing now is that since we have this purple background, we want this to match up with this. So we actually want this purple edge to be there the whole entire time. And when this is actually shrunk, when this landscape object shrunk all the way down like this, we want this to be purple. So what we're going to need to do is go into our gradient and kind of tweak this 3D gradient now. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the start position. So since we moved our landscape here from 0 to 100 right here, we actually need the start of our gradient to be at 0. And then now we have matching purple, so it looks like it blends in. And then you'll see we're having some issues here in that as our object grows, we're getting this kind of gradient cycling here. So we need to adjust our gradient so that we actually don't have movement of our gradient as our object moves. We actually need our gradient to stay stationary in the UV space. So what we're going to do is change the space from object to world. Now what that's going to do is, you can see that pops everything back in, is what that's going to do is as this object kind of passes through this this gradient, it's going to change. So now you can see the gradient's stationary, but the object can move through it, and we get this really psychedelic kind of stuff going on. So that's exactly what we want. So now we have our gradient as a stationary thing in 3D space with our 3D linear gradient here. And as now if we go back and see our object or our landscape scale, you can see that our mountain grows, and it grows into that gradient color. So we actually have it growing on and having that gradient applied to it. So the taller it is, the more it's going to get that yellowish kind of color and bleed into that gradient. So that is all well and good. So then what we're going to do is actually just have this all scale back down again. So I'll bring our timeline back in here, and we have our sketch material that has our strokes being drawn on. So what I'm going to do is just hold Command, click and drag, and bring these keyframes, duplicating them and bringing them over to about frame 100, and then grabbing our first keyframes, doing the same thing, click, holding Command, and bringing these all the way over to about frame 140. So what I want to do is actually build like a looping animation to make it into a GIF later on if I want to. So I'm going to do the same thing with our sketch material. So this is 100% drawn on our contour lines, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the last keyframe, so it goes from 0% drawn on to 100% drawn on, and then back down to 0% drawn on. So you can actually see if I scrub through this that we are scaling down the mountain, and at the same time our lines are getting animated off. So I'm just going to adjust the curves here so we have it a little bit faster drawn on and then easing in at the end. And the important part of this is that the position Y and size Y curves are the same. You'll run into issues if you have a different kind of curve. So now if I hit play, you can see that our position or our size is going faster than our position, so it's kind of losing that illusion of our mountain growing on. So I'm going to undo that so our curves are the same, and there we go. That is looking fine and dandy. So again, this is all editable. You can then, if you want to, you can change the seed of this mountain and just totally change that, and that looks pretty cool too. So now what I want to do is actually have this kind of rotate along the y-axis. And what I'm going to do is just have to get this looping animated GIF kind of thing is a nice little trick with the Time Effector. So with all these effectors, we have this Deformer tab, and by default it's set to off. And I'm sure a lot of people don't even notice this tab or know what the heck it does, but you have the option to affecting an object, a point, or a polygon. So what I'm going to do is you can actually use this as a deformer, hence the Deformer tab, by just like any other deformer, by making it as a child of the object you want to deform. And I'm going to change this from off to object, so it's going to deform the whole entire object. And by default, our parameters are set to rotating. So if I hit play, you can see that this kind of acts as a constant animation and constant rotation by whatever values you put in here. So rotation in the heading is what we want, because we want this nice rotation going. But if I change these other values, you can see that that's adding some rotation in the pitch. And you can do this with position as well. Say you want it to move up slowly over time, so it's kind of taking off like a spaceship or something. So that's a really cool, handy thing with the Time Effector with objects. So you didn't have to put this in a cloner or a fracture or anything like that. Just made it a child of your object. Set the deformer to object. And so what we can do to make this a looping animation is we got to do a little maths. So luckily, I'm not good at maths, but luckily what you can do is to figure out how to get this to loop is by going through how many frames or how many seconds are in your animation. So this is 5 seconds, and we're going to divide that by 360, or full revolution. So 360 divided by 5 equals 72. So that's the nice thing about, you got your own little calculator in these little edit fields, because I'm dumb, I don't know math very well. But you can see that we have this nice looping animation now. So if you see, it's kind of seamless, but what you want to do is, since the first and last keyframes are the same exact thing, you can kind of sense a little bit of a hiccup because you're having duplicate values at the start and end. So what I'm going to do is just bring that down to 71, and that should be a seamless loop. So Time Effector, if you use After Effects and you do that expression, the time multiplied by whatever expression, where it has the same kind of thing, you can add that to just constant rotation values and stuff like that. So this is looking pretty cool. So let's go and just make a preview and see what this looks like with our Sketch and Toon lines drawn on. Alright, so here it is. Let's press play here, and you can see that our mountain scales up, our contour lines draw on and then draw off, and we have this constant looping animation here. So that is it. Well, actually what we can do is, for my GIF that I made of this, I actually created the camera, and then to get that kind of like SimCity kind of look, let's go into this camera view. To get the SimCity kind of look where you're down at isometric view, you just go to projection in your camera, and go to isometric, and then let's find where our little guy is. So we just have this nice kind of 2D flat kind of thing going on here with the isometric view, and that is basically it. So that is how you create a use Sketch and Toon contour lines to create an elevation map in Cinema 4D. Thanks for watching, everyone.